The Inheritance. Complete Story. Part 1. The Last Testament. The rain in Portland didn't just fall. It invaded. It crept through the seams of second-hand coats and settled into bones like an unwelcome tenant who never planned to leave. For Evangeline Merrick, turning 18 wasn't celebrated with cake or cards or tearful hugs from people who actually gave a damn. It was marked by the sound of a group home door locking behind her at exactly midnight. The mechanical click of a deadbolt that translated simply to, "You're done here." The state of Oregon had fulfilled its legal obligation. She was an adult now, which meant in the cold arithmetic of bureaucracy, she was entirely on her own. 3 weeks had passed since that door closed. 3 weeks of learning that the streets had their own curriculum, and the lessons came fast and without mercy. Eva had slept in places that didn't qualify as shelter-eaten things that barely counted as food, and discovered that invisibility was both a survival skill and a slow form of death. The 24-hour laundromat on Morrison Street had been her bedroom for 5 nights, running until the owner, a man with coffee-stained teeth and suspicious eyes, chased her out with a push broom and threats to call the police. The artisan bakery on Hawthorne dumped their day-old pastries in a locked dumpster, now ever since they caught her wrist-deep in trash bags at 4 a.m. The public library was warm, but the security guard had started recognizing her face, and recognition was dangerous. She had $14 left, a damp sleeping bag that smelled like mildew and defeat, and a single photograph creased and fading. Protected in a Ziploc bag she kept in her jacket's inner pocket, the photo showed a woman with kind eyes and dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. Abigail Merrick. Abby, her mother. Dead 10 years now when Eva was only 8 years old. The official report said accidental overdose, heroin. The words had been stamped across Eva's childhood like a brand, turning her into the daughter of a junkie, the girl whose mother chose drugs over living. Eva had stopped believing that story around age 12, when the memories started contradicting the narrative. Her mother's hands had been steady. Her eyes had been clear. She'd been working 2 jobs, studying for her GED at night, planning a future that involved getting Eva out of the foster system entirely. Those weren't the behaviors of an addict spiraling toward death, but Eva's doubts hadn't mattered. The state had its paperwork. The case was closed. Abigail Merrick was just another statistic, and Eva became a number in the system. Now, sitting on the cold concrete of the Greyhound bus terminal, Eva pulled her knees tight to her chest and tried to make herself smaller, invisible. The terminal was a carnival of human misery, a parade of people running from something or towards something, or just running because staying still meant facing whatever they were trying to forget. She had her hood pulled up, her face down. Don't make eye contact, don't draw attention. Survive today, worry about tomorrow when it arrives. That's when she heard the footsteps, not the shuffling drag of someone homeless, not the hurried clip of someone late for a bus. These were different, deliberate. The sharp, rhythmic click of expensive leather shoes on concrete, moving with purpose. The shoes stopped directly in front of her. Eva didn't look up immediately. Her fingers tightened around the straps of her backpack. Every instinct she'd developed over 3 weeks on the street screamed predator. Men in nice shoes didn't approach homeless girls in bus stations for good reasons. Evangeline Merrick. The voice was smooth professional, the kind of voice that came from boardrooms and law offices, not back alleys. Still, Eva kept her head down. "Who's asking?" Her throat was raw from the cold, her voice coming out scratchy and defensive. "My name is Walter Price. I'm an attorney representing the estate of Captain Richard Merrick." Now she looked up. The man was in his early 60s, silver-haired and sharp-featured, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than 6 months of rent. He held a leather briefcase in one hand and a thick manila envelope in the other. His expression was neutral clinical, the face of a man who delivered life-changing news the same way he might discuss the weather. Eva's mind stumbled over the name. "Richard Merrick, your maternal grandfather," Price said, his tone unchanged. "As of his passing 6 months ago, you are listed as his sole heir. It took my firm considerable time to locate you through the state's rather disorganized foster records." Eva felt something cold settle in her stomach. Not grief. She'd never met the man. Her mother had never spoken about him, except to say he was gone, that there was no family, that it had always just been the two of them against the world. "I don't know anyone named Richard Merrick," she said carefully. "Nevertheless, he knew about you." Price extended the envelope. "Inside, you'll find the deed to a property located in the Mount Hood National Forest, approximately 60 miles east of Portland. There are also keys and a prepaid debit card loaded with $500 to facilitate your travel and immediate needs." He paused, his expression shifting almost imperceptibly. "Your grandfather was something of an artist, a landscape painter. The cabin was his studio. He wanted you to have it along with his work. $500. Eva stared at the envelope like it might explode. $500 was 3 months of food. It was a deposit on a room somewhere. It was the difference between surviving and drowning. Why? The question came out sharper than she intended. If he was my grandfather, where the hell was he when my mom died? Where was he when I was getting bounced between foster homes for 10 years? Something flickered across Price's face. Not emotion exactly. More like the brief acknowledgement that the question existed even if he had no intention of answering it. "I'm not retained to speculate on family dynamics, Miss Merrick. I'm here to execute the terms of the estate." He placed the envelope on the concrete beside her when she didn't reach for it. "The property is fully paid off. Utilities are disconnected, but the structure is sound. What you do with it is entirely your decision." He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a single piece of paper, folded once. "Your grandfather also left this. He specified it should be delivered with the deed." Eva took the paper. It was thick, expensive stationery, the kind that felt substantial between your fingers. The handwriting was angular, pressed hard into the page. Price gave a curt nod, already turning to leave. "Good luck, Miss Merrick." "Wait." Eva scrambled to her feet, the envelope clutched against her chest. "That's it. You just drop this on me and walk away." Price paused, glancing back over his shoulder. "The property is yours. The choice of what to do with it is also yours. If you decide to sell, my firm can facilitate that process. Contact information is inside." Then he was gone, disappearing into the crowd of travelers like smoke, leaving Eva standing in the middle of the terminal, holding an envelope that weighed almost nothing and somehow everything at the same time. She sat back down, hands shaking as she tore open the envelope. The deed was there, official, and embossed with county seals. A set of 3 heavy iron keys on a simple ring, and a debit card, bland and anonymous, with a sticky note attached. PIN 0724, July 24th, her mother's birthday. Eva's vision blurred. She blinked hard, refusing to let the tears fall. Not here. Not in front of strangers. She unfolded the letter. The handwriting matched the envelope. Strong, deliberate strokes that looked like they'd been carved rather than written. Eva, if you're reading this, I'm dead. I'm sorry it had to be this way. I'm sorry for a lot of things, but mostly I'm sorry I couldn't protect your mother. I tried. God knows I tried. Come to the cabin. It's yours now. Everything in it is yours. When you get there, find the Motorola radio in the oak cabinet in the main room. Turn it to channel 14, frequency 27.185 megahertz. I left you a message. Trust no one until you hear what I have to say, especially not the man who gave you this letter. Time reveals all, Eva. It's time you knew the truth. Captain Richard Buck, Merrick, USMC, retired. Eva read it 3 times. Each time the words made less sense and more sense simultaneously. Trust no one until you hear what I have to say, especially not the man who gave you this letter. She looked up, scanning the terminal for any sign of Walter Price. He was long gone. The prepaid card felt heavy in her hand. $500. A property. A radio message from a dead man she'd never met. And a warning about the lawyer who just handed her what seemed like salvation. An artist. A studio. Price's words echoed in her mind, but Buck's letter said nothing about painting. It said truth. Eva had spent 3 weeks learning to recognize traps. This had all the hallmarks. A too-good-to-be-true offer from a stranger. A remote location. An inheritance that appeared out of nowhere. But she also had $14 no shelter, and winter closing in fast. She pulled out the deed and studied the address. Miller's Ridge, Mount Hood National Forest. The map coordinates were printed in small type at the bottom. Whatever this was, trap or gift or something in between, it was more than she had right now. Eva stood shouldering her backpack. She folded the letter carefully and tucked it into the Ziploc bag with her mother's photograph. Then she walked to the ticket counter and bought a one-way bus ticket to the town of Ridgewood, the closest civilization to Miller's Ridge. The bus left in 40 minutes. The ride east took 3 hours. The Greyhound climbing steadily away from Portland's urban sprawl and into the dense ancient forests that carpeted the western slopes of Mount Hood. Eva pressed her forehead against the cold window and watched the landscape transform. The rain followed them, turning the world outside into a blur of gray and green. The other passengers were few. An older woman with grocery bags, a man in logging gear who slept with his head against the window, mouth open, a teenager with headphones who never looked up from his phone. Nobody looked at Eva. Nobody cared. She used the time to count her new wealth. The debit card reader at a rest stop confirmed the balance, $500 exactly. She bought a heavy winter coat from a thrift shop attached to a gas station. $15 for a men's large that smelled like mothballs but was lined with fleece. A pair of waterproof work boots. $25 worn but solid. 2 pairs of thick socks. A knit cap. Gloves. At a grocery store, she filled 2 canvas bags with non-perishables. Canned soup beans, tuna crackers, peanut butter, instant coffee, a box of granola bars, a manual can opener, matches, a flashlight and batteries, a basic first aid kit. She wasn't sure what she was preparing for, but she was preparing. By the time the bus pulled into Ridgewood, Eva had spent $160 and felt simultaneously reckless and responsible. Ridgewood wasn't a town so much as a cluster of buildings clinging to existence in the shadow of the mountain. Old timber structures with faded paint, a hardware store, a diner that looked like it hadn't updated its menu since 1987, a gas station with 2 pumps, a post office that was also the town hall. Everything built from the same dark wood, everything smelling of wet pine and wood smoke. The bus stop was just a bench under a rusted metal awning. Eva stepped off into the rain and immediately understood she was being watched. The scrutiny wasn't subtle. A woman sweeping the porch of the general store paused mid-stroke. An old man in a flannel jacket standing outside the hardware store tracked her movement with narrowed eyes. A pickup truck slowed as it passed the driver's gaze, following her like a searchlight. Small towns didn't like strangers, especially not young, homeless-looking girls showing up alone with everything they owned in a backpack. Eva pulled the hood of her new coat up and headed for the hardware store. If she was going to hike 5 miles up a mountain to a cabin that might not have running water or electricity, she needed information. The bell above the door chimed as she entered. The interior was exactly what she expected. Narrow aisles packed with tools, rope nails, propane canisters, camping supplies. The smell of machine oil and sawdust. A radio in the back playing classic rock at low volume. Behind the counter sat a man in his late 60s, broad-shouldered and weathered with a gray beard and eyes that had seen too much of something. His name tag read Dutch. He looked up when Eva approached, his expression neutral but assessing. "Help you?" His voice was gravel and whiskey, the accent pure Pacific Northwest. Eva pulled out the deed and unfolded it on the counter. "I'm looking for this property, Miller's Ridge. The coordinates are here, but I don't have a detailed map." Dutch's eyes dropped to the paper. She watched his expression shift just slightly. Recognition. Something else. Caution, maybe. Or concern. "You're looking for the old Merrick place," he said slowly. "It's mine now," Eva said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "I inherited it." Dutch leaned back, folding his arms across his chest. "You're Buck Merrick's granddaughter." It wasn't a question. "I never met him," Eva admitted. "But yeah, apparently." For a long moment, Dutch just studied her. Then he sighed, the sound heavy with something Eva couldn't identify. He pulled a pad of receipt paper from beside the register and sketched a rough map with a dull pencil. Highway 26 east for 12 miles. There's an unmarked logging road on the north side just past mile marker 47. It's washed out about 2 miles in. You'll have to hike from there. The trail isn't maintained. It's steep, and with this rain it'll be slick as hell. He pushed the sketch toward her. 5 miles from where the road ends. Keep heading northwest. You'll know you're close when you hit the old barbed wire fence line. Your grandfather put that up himself. The cabin's another 1/4 mile past that. Eva folded the map carefully. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet." Dutch's expression was grim. "Nobody's been up to Miller's Ridge in 6 months. Not since Buck disappeared. Some folks think he died up there, and the animals got him. Others think he finally lost his mind and wandered off into the woods." "What do you think?" Eva asked. Dutch looked at her for a long moment. "I think Buck Merrick was the sanest man I ever knew. And I think whatever happened to him, he saw it coming." A chill ran down Eva's spine that had nothing to do with the cold. "One more thing," Dutch said, his voice dropping lower. "You get up there. You get inside. You lock the doors. All of them. And you don't open them for anyone unless you're damn sure you know who's on the other side." Eva wanted to ask why. Wanted to demand an explanation for the warning that sounded less like advice and more like a threat. But something in Dutch's face told her he'd said all he was gonna say. She nodded once, picked up her bags, and left. Outside, the rain had intensified. The old man in the flannel jacket was gone. The street was empty except for a single black SUV parked across from the diner windows tinted too dark to see inside. Eva pulled her hood tighter and started walking toward the highway. The hike to Miller's Ridge was brutal. The logging road Dutch had described was barely recognizable as a road. It was a scar through the forest overgrown with blackberry brambles and vine maple. The gravel surface carved into deep ruts by rain and erosion. Eva followed it for 2 miles, her new boots sinking into mud with every step, before the road simply ended in a washout where a culvert had failed and collapsed. From there, she was on foot in true wilderness. The Douglas firs here were ancient, towering 200 feet overhead and blocking out what little daylight penetrated the storm clouds. The forest floor was a tangle of ferns, fallen logs, slick with moss, and devil's club, with thorns that could pierce denim. The rain turned everything into a monochrome painting, all grays and dark greens, the world reduced to water and wood. Eva's backpack, loaded with supplies, felt like it was filled with concrete. Her legs burned. Her lungs ached from the cold, thin mountain air. She slipped twice, catching herself on tree's bark, scraping her palms raw. But she kept moving. The barbed wire fence appeared after what felt like hours, but was probably 90 minutes. It was old, rusted, sagging in places, but still intact. A boundary marker. A warning. Eva stepped over it carefully and kept going. The cabin materialized through the trees like something out of a fever dream. It was larger than she'd expected, built from massive, dark logs that looked like they'd been cut from the forest a century ago. The roof was corrugated metal stained with rust and thick with moss. The windows were small, positioned high on the walls and covered from the inside with what looked like heavy shutters or boards. The front porch sagged slightly to the left, but the structure itself looked solid, fortress-like. This wasn't a vacation retreat or an artist's studio. This was a place built to keep the world out. Eva climbed the wooden steps, each one groaning under her weight. She pulled the heavy iron key from her pocket, her hands shaking from cold and exhaustion, and something else she didn't want to name. The padlock on the front door was enormous, military grade. The key fit perfectly. With a harsh metallic clank, the lock released. Eva pushed the door open. The smell hit her first. Dust. Old paper. A faint, metallic tang underneath like rust or old blood. The air was stale, undisturbed for months. She fumbled along the wall inside the door frame, found a light switch and flipped it. Nothing. Of course, no power. Eva pulled the flashlight from her backpack and clicked it on. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating a room frozen in time. The main living area was dominated by a heavy oak dining table in the center, covered in a thick layer of dust. A massive stone fireplace occupied the far wall, flanked by floor-to-ceiling bookshelves crammed with binders, loose papers, maps, and books. In the corner sat a ham radio setup, the old Motorola system her grandfather had mentioned, alongside what looked like a vintage police scanner. This wasn't just a cabin. It was a command center. No easels, no canvases, no paint-stained palettes or sketches tacked to walls. Price had lied about the artist's studio. Eva stepped inside, fully her boots, leaving prints in the dust on the wide plank floors. She swept the flashlight beam across the walls. Photographs, dozens of them pinned directly to the logs with thumbtacks. Most were old. The colors faded to yellow and blue. A young man in a Marine Corps dress uniform standing at attention. Face serious. The same man, older, wearing a police chief's badge, shaking hands with someone at a ceremony. A woman with dark hair and a bright smile holding a baby. Eva's breath caught. She moved closer, the flashlight beam steady on that particular photo. The woman was her mother. Younger, maybe 22 or 23. Her hair longer than Eva remembered, her smile wide and genuine. And the baby in her arms, wrapped in a pale yellow blanket, had to be Eva herself. Her grandfather had kept this, had looked at it, had known about her. Eva reached up her fingers, trembling, and carefully unpinned the photograph. She turned it over. On the back, in the same angular handwriting from the letter, were 3 words: Abigail and Evangeline. My girls. The tightness in Eva's chest threatened to crack her open. She blinked hard, shoved the photo into her jacket pocket with her mother's picture, and forced herself to keep moving. The cabin had 3 rooms. The main living area. A small bedroom to the left with a narrow cot, a dresser, and a braided rug on the floor. And a tiny kitchen area to the right with a hand pump over a deep sink, a wood stove, and open shelves stocked with canned goods. Eva tested the hand pump. It was stiff, groaning in protest. But after several hard strokes, water began to flow. It was ice cold and tasted faintly metallic, but it was clean. She found firewood stacked neatly in a shed attached to the back of the cabin, protected from the rain by a slanted roof. After 20 minutes of frustration and 3 matches, she managed to get a fire going in the stone hearth. The heat was immediate and glorious. Eva stripped off her wet coat and boots, hanging them near the fire to dry, and opened a can of soup she heated in a small pot on the wood stove. As she ate, she studied the radio. The Motorola setup looked like something out of a war movie. Dials and switches and a microphone on a coiled cord. A frequency display that was dark, unpowered. Eva had no idea how to work it, but her grandfather's letter had been specific. Channel 14. Frequency 27.185 megahertz. She needed power. A search of the cabin revealed a small generator in the shed, along with 2 5-gallon gas cans. One was empty. The other sloshed when she shook it, maybe half full. It took another 30 minutes, a YouTube video she'd watched once on someone's phone in a library, and a lot of swearing, but Eva got the generator running. She ran an extension cord inside, plugged in the radio, and watched the display flicker to life. The dials glowed a faint green in the darkness. Eva sat down in the chair in front of the radio, her heart hammering. She adjusted the frequency dial carefully until it read 27.185, then switched the channel selector to 14. Static hissed from the speaker. She waited. Nothing. Then she noticed a small cassette player built into the radio console, something she'd missed before. There was a tape already inside labeled simply Evangeline. Eva's hand hovered over the play button. Whatever was on this tape, it was the reason she was here. The reason her grandfather had left her this place. The reason Price had lied about an artist's studio. She pressed play. There was a hiss of static, a click, and then a voice filled the small cabin. It was deep rough with age and cigarettes, but steady, strong. Eva. The sound of her name spoken by a man she'd never met sent a shiver down her spine. If you're hearing this, I'm dead. And if you're hearing this, you're alone up here, which means you followed my instructions and didn't trust anyone. Good. You're smarter than your mother. God rest her soul. There was a pause, the sound of labored breathing. I don't have much time to explain, so listen carefully. Your mother, Abigail, did not die of an overdose. She never touched drugs in her life. She was murdered. Injected with a lethal dose of fentanyl and staged to look like an addict who couldn't handle her fix. Eva's vision tunneled. The room tilted. The man who killed her is Chief Marcus Kane. He runs the Ridgewood Police Department now. But 10 years ago, he was a lieutenant and he was dirty as hell. Your mother found out. She had evidence of a scheme he was running, embezzling millions from the Mount Hood Forest Conservation Fund, funneling it through shell companies, stripping protected land, and selling the timber to private buyers. The voice paused again, and Eva heard something that might have been a suppressed cough or a choked sob. Abby was gonna take the evidence to the FBI. She told me the night before she died. I begged her to wait to let me handle it, but she was stubborn, brave, just like you. Kane found out. He got to her first. Eva couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't process the words that were dismantling everything she believed about her mother's death. I've spent the last 10 years gathering evidence, building a case that can't be ignored. It's all here, Eva. Financial records, witness statements, recordings. Everything you need to bury Marcus Kane and everyone who helped him. It's in a lockbox under the floorboards in the bedroom. The combination is your mother's birthday, 0724. The recording crackled with interference, then steadied. But you need to understand something. The man who gave you the deed, Walter Price, he works for Kane. They knew I was dying. They waited until I was gone. Then they found you and handed you this property because they need you to open the cabin. They've been trying to get inside for months, but I made sure they couldn't without destroying the evidence in the process. So they used you. Your bait, Eva. And they're coming. The cassette player clicked. Take the money. Take the files. Get to the FBI field office in Seattle. Don't trust anyone in Ridgewood. Don't trust local law enforcement. Don't trust anyone who tells you they're here to help. Kane owns this town. He owns the roads. He owns the people. Another pause, longer this time. I'm sorry, Eva. I'm sorry I couldn't protect your mother. I'm sorry I wasn't there for you. I thought keeping my distance would keep you safe, that if Kane didn't know you existed, he couldn't use you. I was wrong. But maybe if you're hearing this, I can still give you the one thing I couldn't give Abby. The truth. And a fighting chance. The tape hissed into silence. Eva sat frozen, her hands gripping the edge of the table so hard her knuckles were white. Her mother hadn't been a junkie. She'd been a hero. She'd been murdered for trying to do the right thing. And now Eva was sitting in the middle of the trap her grandfather had predicted. She stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. The bedroom. The lockbox. She grabbed the flashlight and moved quickly to the small room, dropping to her knees beside the narrow cot. The braided rug covered most of the floor. Eva yanked it aside. The floorboards beneath the bed were different from the rest of the cabin. Newer, smoother, cedar instead of pine. She pulled the flathead screwdriver from her backpack and wedged it between the boards. They came up easier than she expected, revealing a dark cavity beneath the floor joists. Inside was an olive green military surplus lockbox, heavy and reinforced. Eva dragged it out, her hands shaking. The combination lock on the front had 4 dials. 0724. The lock clicked open. Eva lifted the lid. The first thing she saw was money. Stacks of $100 bills, rubber-banded and worn like they'd been in circulation for decades. She did a quick count. At least $75,000. Maybe more. Beneath the cash were manila folders bulging with documents. A Smith & Wesson .38 revolver, heavy and deadly. 6 cassette tapes labeled Witness 1 through Witness 6. And at the bottom, a single photograph. Eva picked it up. It was a surveillance photo, grainy and slightly out of focus, taken with a telephoto lens. 2 men shaking hands outside a bar. The sign above the door read, Ridgewood Tavern. One of the men was Walter Price, the lawyer who'd given her the deed. The other was older, barrel-chested, with a crew cut and a face like a clenched fist. On the back of the photo, in her grandfather's handwriting, Marcus Kane and Walter Price. March 2025. 3 months ago. Eva's stomach turned to ice. They'd been planning this, waiting for her grandfather to die, waiting to use her. The lie about the artist's studio made perfect sense now. Just another layer of deception. To make the inheritance seem innocent, she shoved the photo back into the box and started pulling out the folders. Project Redwood, bank transfers, shell companies, names and signatures, and there on a land survey document signed in bold ink, Chief Marcus Kane, Ridgewood Police Department. Eva had read enough. She began stuffing the folders back into the lockbox. The money, the gun, the cassettes, everything. Her grandfather had been right. They were coming, and she needed to be gone before they arrived. She was halfway through repacking when she heard it. The sound was faint at first, muffled by the rain and the thick log walls. The low rumble of a heavy engine, tires on gravel. Eva's blood turned to ice water. She clicked off the flashlight and moved to the window, pressing her back against the wall. Through a crack in the shutters, she could see headlights cutting through the darkness, winding up the washed-out logging road. 2 vehicles, SUVs, black. They stopped about 50 yards from the cabin. Engines cut off. Doors opened and slammed shut. Eva counted 4 men. Flashlights. One carrying what looked like a crowbar. And then a voice, amplified and authoritative, cut through the rain. Miss Merrick, Ridgewood Police. We know you're in there. Open the door. We need to talk about your grandfather's estate. Eva recognized the voice from the recording. Rough, commanding. Chief Marcus Kane, the man who murdered her mother, was standing on her porch. Part 2. Brothers in Arms. Eva's mind went blank with terror for exactly 3 seconds. Then, training she didn't know she had kicked in. The survival instinct honed by 3 weeks on Portland streets, by 10 years of learning that no one was coming to save her. She moved. The lockbox was still open on the bedroom floor. Eva grabbed the manila folders, shoving them into her backpack with shaking hands. The cash. The cassette tapes. She left the gun, her fingers hovering over the cold metal before deciding against it. She had no idea how to use it, and carrying a weapon she couldn't fire was worse than useless. The pounding on the front door started before she finished packing. Heavy. Rhythmic. The sound of a fist that expected compliance. "Miss Merrick, this is Chief Kane. We're here to help you understand the situation with your grandfather's property. There are legal issues that need to be addressed immediately." The voice was smooth now, almost friendly, but Ava could hear the steel underneath, the assumption that she would obey. She zipped the backpack closed, slung it over both shoulders, and looked around the bedroom desperately. One window, small and high on the wall, covered with a board from the inside. The front door was the only exit. Except... Eva dropped to her knees, looking back into the crawl space where the lockbox had been hidden. The cavity extended beyond the immediate area beneath the floorboards, disappearing into darkness under the rest of the cabin. Her grandfather had been paranoid. He'd rigged this place with alarms, which meant he'd also built himself a way out. Another massive impact against the front door. Wood splintered. "Morrison, get the goddamn crowbar. She's locked it from inside." Eva squeezed herself into the gap between the floor joists, pulling her backpack after her. The space was tight, suffocating barely 2 feet of clearance. Dirt and cobwebs. The smell of earth and rot. She pulled the cedar floorboards back into place above her head, just as the front door gave way with a thunderous crash. "Clear the main room." The voice was directly above her, now boots thundering across the floor. Eva held her breath, pressing her face against the cold dirt, every muscle locked rigid. "Check the bedroom. She can't have gone far." More footsteps. Heavier. Someone big moving through the cabin with the confidence of authority. "Chief, someone's been here recently. Fire's still warm. Soup can on the stove. Find her." Eva didn't wait to hear more. She began crawling backward away from the voices, following the cold draft of air that cut through the stale darkness. Her backpack scraped against the joists above. Dirt ground into her jeans. Spiderwebs caught in her hair. The crawl space sloped downward, and she followed it, moving as quietly as she could, while her heart hammered loud enough she was sure they'd hear it through the floorboards. Behind her, muffled by earth and wood. "Box is here. Empty. God damn it. She already found it. Tear this place apart. Check for hiding spots. False walls, anything." The crawl space terminated at a wooden grate built into the stone foundation, reinforced with rusty metal straps. Eva pushed against it. It didn't budge. Above and behind her, furniture crashed. Glass shattered. Eva braced her feet against the foundation wall and kicked the grate with both heels. Once. Twice. The wood was old, weakened by decades of moisture. On the third kick, the nails gave way with a screech of metal. The grate tumbled out into the night. Eva squeezed through the opening and fell 4 feet into a thicket of wet ferns behind the cabin's woodshed. Rain immediately soaked through her clothes, ice cold and relentless. She scrambled to her feet and ran. The forest swallowed her whole. Running through old-growth forest in darkness and rain was less like running and more like controlled falling. Eva couldn't see more than 5 feet ahead. The beam of her flashlight would give her away, so she ran blind. Hands outstretched, crashing through underbrush that tore at her clothes and skin. Branches whipped across her face. Her boots caught on hidden roots. The ground was a minefield of rocks, fallen logs, and holes that could break an ankle. Behind her, barely audible over the rain, barking. Dogs. They'd brought K9 units. Eva's panic spiked into something beyond fear. She changed direction, angling downhill toward where she remembered a creek, crossing the trail on her way up. Water would mask her scent. Maybe. The forest opened slightly, the undergrowth thinning as the grade steepened. Eva's momentum carried her faster than her feet could manage. She tried to slow, but her boot caught on a root. She went down hard. The world became a tumbling chaos of mud and thorns. Eva crashed through a thicket of blackberry brambles, the thorns shredding her jacket and hands, before slamming into something solid. A fallen cedar thick as a car, blocking her fall. Pain exploded in her left ankle, white-hot and immediate. Eva bit down on her lip hard enough to taste blood, swallowing the scream. She lay there in the mud rain hammering down, trying to breathe through the agony. Her ankle was either sprained or broken. Either way, running was over. The barking was closer now. Flashlight beams cut through the trees above her, sweeping back and forth. Eva forced herself to move. She dragged herself behind the fallen cedar, pressing her body into the hollow space where the roots had torn free from the earth when the tree fell. The depression was maybe 3 feet deep, filled with water and rotting wood, but it offered concealment. She pulled wet ferns and branches over herself, then went absolutely still. The flashlight beams grew brighter. Voices, distorted by rain and distance, called to each other. The dog barking became frantic, then uncertain. Eva held her breath. A flashlight beam passed directly over her hiding spot, paused, moved on. "Lost the scent at the creek," a voice called out. Younger than Kane, frustrated. "Water's too high." She could have gone downstream or up. "Split up," Kane's voice, harsh and commanding. "Morrison, you take downstream with the dog. I'll check upstream. She's on foot, injured and carrying a pack. She won't get far." "Chief, we've been at this for 2 hours. Maybe we should wait for daylight, bring in more units." "Nobody else. You understand me. This stays between us until we recover those files. That girl has evidence that could put us all away for 20 years. Find her." The voices moved away, one upstream, one down. Eva waited. 5 minutes. 10. The cold water in the hollow was leaching the heat from her body. Her teeth chattered. Her ankle throbbed with every heartbeat. She couldn't stay here. But she couldn't run. Then she heard it. Different from the police vehicles. A deeper rumble, grinding gears, struggling over rough terrain. An engine. Coming from the opposite direction. Eva pulled herself out of the hollow, biting back a whimper as weight shifted onto her injured ankle. She half crawled, half dragged herself toward the sound, using trees and rocks to pull herself along. She broke through the tree line onto a muddy utility road she hadn't known existed. And there, idling with its headlights completely dark, was a truck. not an SUV. An old Ford pickup, maybe 30 years old, covered in rust and dents with a camper shell over the bed. A figure stepped out of the driver's side holding a lever-action rifle. Eva's hand went to her backpack, fumbling for anything she could use as a weapon. Her fingers closed around the heavy Maglite flashlight. She raised it like a club, her voice cracking. "Stay back." The figure stepped closer, lowering the rifle barrel toward the mud. Lightning flashed, illuminating his face. He was in his late 60s, broad-shouldered despite his age, with a gray beard and deep-set eyes that looked like they'd seen combat and never fully come home. He wore a faded Marine Corps jacket and boots that had walked 1,000 miles. Dutch, from the hardware store. "Put that down, kid," he said, his voice surprisingly calm for a man facing a muddy, bleeding, desperate girl in the middle of a storm. "If I wanted you dead, you'd already be dead." Eva didn't lower the flashlight. "You sent me up there. You knew. If I wanted Kane to have you, I would have called him the second you walked into my store." Dutch took another step forward, his movements slow and deliberate. "Richard Merrick was my best friend. Saved my life more times than I can count. He told me that if some slick lawyer ever came sniffing around asking about the cabin, it meant Kane was making his move. He told me to watch for his granddaughter." Dutch spat into the mud. "He told me to keep you alive long enough to get the truth out." Eva's arm wavered. "How do I know you're telling the truth?" Dutch set the rifle against the truck and reached into his jacket. Eva tensed, but he pulled out a photograph protected in a plastic sleeve and held it out. The photo showed two young men in desert camouflage arms around each other's shoulders, faces burned dark by sun and sand. Behind them, smoke rose from burning oil fields. Kuwait 1991 was written on the back. One of the men was clearly Dutch, 30 years younger. The other had the same angular face, the same hard eyes as the Marine in the photos inside the cabin. Her grandfather. "Buck Merrick pulled me out of a burning Humvee during the highway of death," Dutch said quietly. "Carried me 3 miles while taking mortar fire. I owe him my life, which means I owe you whatever help I can give." The flashlight beam swept across the utility road behind them, voices calling in the distance. "But right now," Dutch continued, "we need to move. Get in the truck." Eva looked at the photograph, then at Dutch's face, then back at the approaching lights. She made a choice. She hobbled to the passenger side, threw open the door, and hauled herself inside. Dutch was behind the wheel before she'd even closed the door, slamming the truck into gear. They tore down the utility road, heavy tires spitting mud, just as headlights crested the ridge behind them. The truck's interior smelled like motor oil, coffee, and old canvas. Dutch drove without headlights, navigating by memory and whatever moonlight broke through the storm clouds. The road was barely a road, more like a dried creek bed with delusions of infrastructure. Eva clutched the door handle as they bounced over rocks and ruts. "Where are we going?" "Somewhere Kane can't follow without making this official," Dutch said, his eyes fixed on the road. "My place, 15 miles northwest outside Ridgewood jurisdiction." He glanced at her, taking in the blood on her hands, the torn jacket, the way she was cradling her left ankle. "You hurt bad. Ankle. Might be broken. We'll deal with it when we're clear." They drove in silence for several minutes, the only sound the rain hammering on the roof and the laboring engine. Eva watched the side mirror, waiting for headlights to appear behind them. None came. Eventually, Dutch turned onto a paved road, then another putting distance between them and Miller's Ridge. The tension in his shoulders eased slightly. "Your grandfather planned this," he said finally. "Spent the last year of his life setting it up. He knew he was dying. Liver cancer. Refused treatment. Said he'd earned the right to die on his own terms." Eva's throat tightened. Why didn't he just go to the FBI himself? Why leave it for me? He tried. 3 times. Dutch's jaw clenched. "Kane has people inside the Portland field office. Every time Buck made contact, Kane found out within 24 hours. Last time, Buck barely made it back to the cabin alive. Ambushed on the drive home. He knew then that the only way the evidence would make it out was if someone Kane didn't know about carried it. So he used me." "He protected you," Dutch corrected. "He kept you out of Kane's sights your whole life. Made sure there was no paper trail connecting you to him. And then, when he knew he was dying, he gave you the one thing that could bring Kane down." "The truth," Eva said quietly. "The truth," Dutch agreed. "And a fighting chance to do something with it." The truck turned onto a gravel driveway climbing through dense trees. A small cabin appeared in the headlights. Modest but solid smoke rising from a stone chimney. Dutch parked and killed the engine. "Come on, let's get you inside." Eva tried to stand and gasped. Her ankle had swollen inside her boot, the pressure unbearable. Dutch caught her before she fell, letting her lean on him as they made their way to the front door. The interior was sparse. A wood stove, a small kitchen, a couch that had seen better decades. Military memorabilia on the walls, photos, medals in frames, a folded American flag in a display case. Dutch helped Eva to the couch, then disappeared into the kitchen. He returned with a first aid kit, a basin of warm water, and a bottle of whiskey. "Let me see the ankle." It took 5 agonizing minutes to work the boot off. Her ankle was purple and swollen to twice its normal size. Dutch examined it with practiced hands, pressing gently, watching her face for reactions. "Not broken," he said finally. "Bad sprain. You're lucky." He wrapped it efficiently with an elastic bandage, then handed her the whiskey. "Drink. You've earned it." Eva took a pull. It burned all the way down, but the warmth was welcome. Dutch sat in the chair across from her, the rifle resting against the wall within easy reach. "I need to know what you found in that cabin." "Everything." Eva set down the bottle and pulled the backpack into her lap. She unpacked it piece by piece. The folders, the cash, the cassette tapes, the photograph of Price and Kane. Dutch's expression darkened as he examined each item. When he opened the first folder and saw the bank transfer documents, his hands began to shake. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. "Buck actually did it. He documented the whole goddamn thing." "What is Project Redwood?" Eva asked. Dutch looked up, his eyes haunted. "It started 15 years ago. The federal government established a conservation fund to protect old-growth forest in the Mount Hood region. $8.2 million. Kane was a lieutenant then in charge of coordinating with the Forest Service on land surveys and boundary enforcement." He pointed to a transfer document. "He figured out he could falsify the surveys, mark protected land as already logged or privately owned. Then his people would go in, strip the timber, and sell it through shell companies. The money got laundered through fake conservation grants and disappeared into offshore accounts. How many people were involved? In Ridgewood, dozens. The mayor, the county clerk, half the police force, the logging union boss, anyone with the authority to sign paperwork or look the other way. Dutch's voice was bitter. Kane owns this town. He made everyone complicit, so no one could turn on him without going down themselves. Eva thought about the cassette tapes. My grandfather said he had witness statements. 6 people, Dutch confirmed. 6 people who either got out of the conspiracy or lost someone to it. Buck spent 5 years tracking them down, getting them to talk on tape. He paused, his expression cracking slightly. My daughter was one of them. The air in the room seemed to freeze. Margaret, Dutch said, his voice rough. She was 45, worked as a bookkeeper for the logging company Kane used as his front. She figured out what was happening. Went to Buck because she knew he'd been a cop. Once thought he could help. Dutch stood abruptly, walking to the window, his back to Eva. 3 weeks later, her car went off Miller's Ridge Road. Single vehicle accident. Brake failure. The investigation concluded she'd been drinking. He laughed, bitter and broken. Margaret didn't drink. Hadn't touched alcohol since she was 20. I'm sorry. Eva said, the words inadequate. Kane killed her, Dutch said flatly. Same as he killed your mother. Same as he's tried to kill anyone who threatened to expose him. He turned back to face her. That's why I'm helping you. Not just because Buck asked. Because I want to watch Marcus Kane burn for what he took from me. Eva looked down at the folders spread across the couch. Millions of dollars. 15 years of corruption. Multiple murders. How do we get this to the FBI without Kane finding out? We don't go to the Portland office, Dutch said. We bypass them entirely. Go straight to Seattle, the regional field office. We bring these files, we bring the witnesses on tape, and we make enough noise that Kane can't silence it. Seattle's 120 miles away, which is why we leave tonight. Dutch checked his watch. It's almost midnight. We drive straight through, get there by morning, and walk into the FBI office the second they open. Eva's exhausted mind tried to process the plan. Kane will be looking for us. He'll have roadblocks, police scanners. He'll be looking for you alone, not you with me. And not in this truck. Dutch gestured to the old Ford outside. I've been driving these back roads for 40 years. I know every logging trail, every fire road, every way around the main highways. We can make it. Eva wanted to believe him. Wanted to trust that there was a path forward that didn't end with her dead in a ditch. But there was a piece missing. The cassette tape in the cabin, she said slowly. My grandfather said my mother didn't overdose. He said Kane murdered her. But he didn't explain why. What did she find? Dutch went still. You don't know what? He crossed the room and picked up one of the folders labeled Evidence, Abigail Merrick. He opened it carefully, pulling out a document that Eva hadn't examined yet. It was a photocopy of a handwritten ledger, the kind kept in spiral-bound notebooks. Names, dates, and dollar amounts in columns. Your mother worked as a waitress at the Ridgewood Tavern, Dutch said. The same bar where Kane and his people held their meetings. She was invisible to them, just the girl who brought the drinks and cleared the plates. He pointed to an entry dated June 2015. But your mother was smart and observant. She noticed that the owner kept a separate set of books in his office. Cash payments that didn't match the register. Money coming in from people who didn't order food or drinks. Eva leaned forward, reading the names. Marcus Kane, Walter Price, a dozen others. Protection payments, Dutch said. Bribes to keep quiet about Project Redwood. Payments to local officials to falsify documents. Your mother photographed the entire ledger over a period of 3 weeks. She was building a case. She was going to turn them in, Eva said. She was. But she made one mistake. Dutch's expression was grim. She told someone she trusted. Someone she thought was safe. He pulled out another document. A police report dated June 24th, 2015. The officer's signature at the bottom, Lieutenant Marcus Kane. Your mother called the police non-emergency line to ask how to report financial crimes. The dispatcher put her through to the detective division. Kane answered the phone. Eva's vision blurred. Her mother had asked for help from the very man she was trying to expose. He knew within an hour, Dutch said quietly. He went to her apartment that night. The autopsy Buck commissioned years later showed injection marks on her neck. Fentanyl administered in a dose that would kill within minutes. Kane staged it to look like an overdose planted drug paraphernalia and made sure the official investigation concluded exactly what he wanted. Eva couldn't breathe. The room was spinning. You were at a friend's house that night, Dutch continued. A sleepover. Your mother made sure you weren't home. She was protecting you even at the end. The tears came then, silent and burning. Eva had spent 10 years believing her mother had abandoned her chosen drugs over living. And all that time, Abigail Merrick had been a hero who died trying to save people from a corrupt system. Dutch gave her space to grieve, turning away to give her privacy. When Eva finally found her voice again, it was steel. We're going to Seattle. Tonight. And we're going to make sure everyone knows what Kane did. Dutch nodded. I'll get the truck ready. You rest that ankle for 20 minutes, then we move. He started toward the door, then paused. Eva, your mother would be proud of you. The words broke something loose in her chest. But they also gave her strength. 20 minutes later, they were on the road. Dutch drove without headlights for the first 10 miles, navigating Forest Service roads that weren't marked on any official map. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the world soaked and dark under a moonless sky. Eva kept watch out the passenger window, scanning for any sign of pursuit. The backpack with the evidence sat at her feet within easy reach. They'd been driving for maybe 30 minutes when Dutch suddenly swore and hit the brakes. Ahead, blocking the narrow forest road, was a Ridgewood police cruiser. Lights off, engine running, waiting. Hold on, Dutch said. He threw the truck into reverse and gunned it. The Ford shot backward, tires screaming. The cruiser's lights blazed on and it lunged forward, closing the gap. Dutch spun the wheel. The truck swung sideways and he shifted into drive, tearing off down a side trail, so narrow that branches scraped both sides of the vehicle. The police cruiser followed. They must have been monitoring the scanner, Dutch shouted over the roar of the engine. Knew we'd use the back roads. A second cruiser appeared ahead, cutting them off. Dutch didn't slow. He yanked the wheel hard right, and the truck crashed through underbrush, bouncing over rocks and fallen logs, carving its own path through the forest. Behind them, the cruisers tried to follow. One got stuck immediately, its lower clearance bottoming out on a log. The second kept coming. Dutch reached Highway 26, doing 60, the truck fishtailing as it hit pavement. He turned east toward Mount Hood and Seattle beyond. The cruiser was still behind them, lights flashing now, siren wailing. "They're going to call for backup," Eva said, her voice tight. "Let them. Once we're out of Ridgewood jurisdiction, they can't touch us without cause." But the cruiser was gaining. Newer, faster, better maintained. It pulled alongside them in the opposite lane. Eva could see the deputy driving. Young, maybe 35, his face set and determined. Morrison. The name came back from the voices at the cabin. The cruiser swerved into them. Metal screamed as the vehicles collided. Dutch fought the wheel, keeping the truck on the road. Morrison rammed them again, harder this time, trying to force them off into the ditch. "Brace yourself," Dutch said. He hit the brakes. The sudden deceleration caught Morrison off guard. The cruiser shot past them and Dutch cranked the wheel, putting the truck's reinforced front bumper directly into the cruiser's rear quarter panel. The physics were brutal and immediate. The cruiser spun out, overcorrected, and flipped. It rolled 3 times before coming to rest upside down in the middle of the highway roof, crushed lights still flashing. Dutch didn't stop. He accelerated past the wreckage, the speedometer climbing. Eva looked back. The cruiser wasn't moving. "Is he?" "Don't know. Don't care." Dutch's voice was hard. "He tried to kill us. We defended ourselves." They drove in silence for another 20 miles. Every set of headlights made Eva's heart race, but none of them were police. As they crossed into the outskirts of Portland, Dutch finally seemed to relax slightly. "We'll be in Seattle in 90 minutes, he said. "FBI office opens at 8. We'll be waiting at the door." Eva looked down at the backpack. Everything her grandfather had died protecting. Everything her mother had been killed to hide. She would make sure it mattered. But first, they had to survive the night. Part 3, Judgment Day. They didn't stop in Portland. Dutch drove straight through the city, taking surface streets instead of the interstate, navigating by instinct through neighborhoods that looked the same in the pre-dawn darkness. Strip malls, gas stations, fast food places with flickering signs. The ordinary machinery of American life humming along, while Eva sat in a stolen moment between her old existence and whatever came next. Her ankle throbbed with every heartbeat. Her hands were crusted with dried blood from the blackberry thorns. She smelled like mud and fear, and the metallic tang of adrenaline that wouldn't quite leave her system. But she was alive, and she had the evidence. As they crossed the Columbia River into Washington, the sky began to lighten in the east. Not sunrise yet, but the dilution of absolute darkness into something softer, gray instead of black. "We need to make a stop," Dutch said, breaking the silence that had held since they'd left the overturned cruiser behind. Eva tensed. "Where?" "Someone who can help. Someone your grandfather trusted." He turned off the highway onto a narrow road that wound through what looked like farmland. Fallow fields, weathered barns, the landscape of rural Washington that hadn't changed much in 50 years. After 10 minutes, he pulled up to a small church. It was white clapboard, simple and plain, with a modest steeple and a sign that read, "St. Michael's Episcopal Church, established 1947. The parking lot was empty except for a single car, a sedan so old It might have been original to the church's founding. "Wait here," Dutch said. He got out and walked to the side door of the church, knocked 3 times and waited. The door opened. A figure stood silhouetted in the doorway, tall and thin, dressed in dark clothing. After a moment, Dutch gestured toward the truck. The figure approached. As he came into the dawn light, Eva saw he was an older man, maybe 70, with white hair, and the kind of face that had spent a lifetime listening to other people's suffering and carrying it with them. He wore a black shirt with a clerical collar and moved with the careful deliberation of someone whose joints didn't work quite like they used to. Dutch opened Eva's door. "This is Reverend David Whitmore. He was your grandfather's priest." Whitmore extended a hand. His grip was surprisingly strong. "Miss Merrick, I've been expecting you." "How?" "Buck told me 6 months ago that if things went according to plan, a young woman would show up at Dutch's place with evidence that could destroy Marcus Kane. He asked me to help in any way I could." Whitmore's expression was grave. "I heard about the incident on Highway 26. The state police found Deputy Morrison's vehicle. He's in critical condition." Eva's stomach turned. "Is he gonna die?" "They don't know yet. But that's not your fault, child. He was trying to kill you." "We need to keep moving," Dutch said. "Kane will have people looking for us by now. Which is why you can't simply walk into the FBI office in Seattle," Whitmore said. "Kane has contacts there. Not many, but enough. If you show up unannounced, you'll be funneled to the wrong people, and the evidence will disappear before it ever reaches someone who can act on it." Eva felt the hope that had been building since they escaped begin to crumble. "Then what do we do?" "You bypass the normal channels entirely." Whitmore pulled a phone from his pocket. "I have a contact. Someone I trust absolutely. Agent Michael Barrett. He runs the Public Corruption Unit out of the Seattle field office. He's also a veteran Gulf War, so he understands the brotherhood that exists between soldiers. When Dutch vouches for you, Barrett will listen." "Can you reach him?" Dutch asked. "I already have." Whitmore handed the phone to Eva. "He's waiting." Eva took the phone with trembling hands and raised it to her ear. "Miss Merrick." The voice on the other end was deep, authoritative, but not unkind. "This is Special Agent Michael Barrett. Reverend Whitmore has given me an overview of your situation. Before we go any further, I need to know, are you currently in immediate danger?" Eva looked at Dutch, then at the empty road behind them. "I don't think so. Not right now." "Good. Then here's what's going to happen. I'm going to text an address to this phone. It's not our main office. It's a secure location where we conduct sensitive interviews. You're going to drive there with Mr. Hendricks. When you arrive, you'll be met by 2 agents I personally trust. They will escort you inside, and you will not speak to anyone else. Do you understand?" "Yes." "Miss Merrick, I want you to understand something. What you're describing, a corruption network involving local law enforcement and civic officials, is extremely serious. If what Reverend Whitmore says is true, and you have documentary evidence of embezzlement and murder, this will become a federal priority. But I need to see that evidence with my own eyes before I can move forward." "I have it," Eva said. "Bank records, witness statements, everything." There was a pause. "Then we'll see you in 2 hours. Stay safe." The line went dead. A moment later, the phone buzzed with a text message. An address in Seattle. No other details. Whitmore took the phone back. Barrett's a good man. One of the few who can't be bought or intimidated. If anyone can bring Kane down, it's him. He placed a hand on Eva's shoulder. Your grandfather was a stubborn, paranoid, difficult man, but he was also one of the bravest people I've ever known. He spent the last year of his life in confession. Not because he'd sinned, but because he needed someone to know the truth, in case he didn't live to tell it himself. He loved you, Eva, even though he never met you. Eva's throat closed. She managed a nod. Whitmore stepped back. Go, and may God go with you. The address Barrett had provided led them to an unmarked office building in an industrial area south of Seattle's downtown core. 3 stories of concrete and tinted glass, anonymous and deliberately forgettable. Dutch parked in the nearly empty lot. The sun was fully up now, the sky overcast but bright. Morning traffic hummed on the nearby freeway. They sat for a moment, neither moving. You ready for this? Dutch asked. Eva looked down at the backpack in her lap. Inside were the folders that would dismantle a 15-year criminal conspiracy, the cassette tapes that would give voice to the dead and the silenced, the proof that her mother had been murdered. I'm ready, she said. They got out of the truck. Eva's ankles screamed in protest, but she forced herself to walk without limping. Dutch stayed close, his hand near the small of his back where Eva suspected he'd tucked a pistol. The building's front door was locked. Dutch pressed the intercom button. Hendricks and Merrick, he said to the speaker. The lock buzzed. They went inside. The lobby was bare. Industrial carpet, fluorescent lights, a security desk with no one behind it, an elevator at the far end. The elevator doors opened before they reached it. 2 people stepped out. A woman in her mid-40s with short, dark hair and a no-nonsense expression, wearing a dark suit with an FBI badge clipped to her belt. And a man younger, maybe 30, built like he'd played college football, with alert eyes that cataloged everything. Miss Merrick, the woman said. I'm Special Agent Linda Kozlowski. This is Special Agent David Chen. We work directly for Agent Barrett. Please come with us. They rode the elevator to the 3rd floor in silence. The doors opened onto a corridor that looked like every government building Eva had ever been in. Beige walls, numbered doors, the smell of old coffee and copy machine toner. Kozlowski led them to a conference room at the end of the hall. Inside, a man in his 50s sat at a long table. He had graying hair cut military short, a square jaw, and eyes that had seen people lie more times than they'd seen people tell the truth. He stood when they entered. Miss Merrick, Mr. Hendricks, I'm Michael Barrett. He gestured to the chairs across from him. Please sit. Eva lowered herself into the chair, grateful to take weight off her ankle. Dutch sat beside her, ramrod straight. Barrett studied them for a moment. You've had a rough night. That's one way to put it, Dutch said. Before we begin, I need to establish something. Barrett folded his hands on the table. Everything said in this room is being recorded. This is for your protection as much as ours. If this case goes to trial, we need an unassailable chain of evidence. Do you consent to being recorded? Yes, Eva said. Yes, Dutch echoed. Barrett nodded to Kozlowski, who pressed a button on a device in the center of the table. A red light blinked on. It's 8:47 a.m. November 2nd, 2025. Present are Special Agent Michael Barrett, Special Agent Linda Kozlowski, Special Agent David Chen, Miss Evangeline Merrick, and Mr. Thomas Hendricks. Miss Merrick, you contacted us through Reverend David Whitmore with information regarding criminal activity in Ridgewood, Oregon. Is that correct? Yes. Please tell me in your own words what brought you here today. Eva took a breath, and then she told them everything. She started with the bus station, the lawyer with the expensive suit, and his lie about an artist's studio, the cabin on Miller's Ridge, her grandfather's voice on the cassette tape explaining how her mother had been murdered. She told them about the lockbox, the money, the files. She told them about Cain breaking down the door, about running through the forest, about Dutch pulling her out of a ravine with police dogs closing in. She told them about the crash on Highway 26, and she didn't flinch when Barrett's expression hardened. When she finished, the room was silent. Then Barrett said, "May I see the evidence?" Eva opened the backpack and began removing items. The folders, the cassette tapes, the photograph of Cain and Price. Barrett put on latex gloves before touching anything. He opened the first folder, the one labeled Project Redwood, and began reading. Minutes passed. His expression never changed, but Eva watched his jaw muscles tighten. He moved to the next folder, then the next. Finally, he looked up. "Mr. Hendricks, you can corroborate Miss Merrick's account." Every word Dutch said. "I can also provide additional context. Buck Merrick and I served together in Desert Storm. He was the most honest man I've ever known. If he documented something, it's true." Barrett picked up one of the cassette tapes. "Do you have a way to play these?" Chen left the room and returned 2 minutes later with an old cassette player. The kind that was standard government issue in the 90s and never got replaced because it still worked. Barrett inserted the tape labeled Witness 1 and pressed play. A woman's voice filled the room, shaky but determined. "My name is Patricia Voss. I was the county clerk for Ridgewood from 2008 to 2016. In 2012, Chief Marcus Cain approached me with a request to backdate property transfers for several parcels of land in the Mount Hood National Forest. He told me it was a clerical error that needed to be corrected. I complied because he was a police officer and I trusted him." The woman's voice cracked slightly. 2 years later, I realized what I'd done. The property transfers were part of a scheme to illegally harvest protected timber. When I confronted Chief Cain, he told me that if I went to the authorities, he would make sure I was charged as a co-conspirator. He said I'd go to prison, that my children would grow up without a mother. I stayed silent. God forgive me, I stayed silent. The tape continued for another 20 minutes. Patricia Voss described in detail the mechanism of the fraud, the names of the people involved, the amounts of money that changed hands. Barrett played all 6 tapes. 6 voices. 6 people who had been threatened, coerced, or blackmailed into helping Cain, and who had finally found the courage to speak. One of them was Dutch's daughter, Margaret. When her voice came through the speaker, Dutch's hands clenched into fists, but he didn't look away. Margaret described working as a bookkeeper, noticing discrepancies, trying to investigate quietly. She described being followed, receiving threatening phone calls, finding her brake lines cut. "I know what's going to happen. Margaret said on the tape, her voice eerily calm. "I know Chief Kane won't let me live if I keep digging, but I'm making this statement anyway because someone needs to know the truth. Someone needs to stop him." The tape clicked off. Barrett sat in silence for a long moment. Then he said, "Agent Kozlowski, I want a warrant drafted for the arrest of Chief Marcus Kane on charges of embezzlement, racketeering, and conspiracy to commit murder. I want warrants for Walter Price, Deputy Jake Morrison, and every name in these files. I want them executed simultaneously within the next 6 hours." Kozlowski was already on her feet. "I'll coordinate with the U.S. Attorney's Office. Agent Chen, contact the Oregon State Police. I want uniformed troopers, not Ridgewood locals, securing the crime scenes. I want Kane's office, his home, the police station, and the Ridgewood Tavern locked down." Chen nodded and left. Barrett turned back to Eva and Dutch. "What you've brought me is the most comprehensive documentation of municipal corruption I've seen in 20 years. This is going to be a federal case prosecuted at the highest level. Kane is done." "What about the people he hurt?" Eva asked. "My mother, Margaret Hendricks, the others. We'll reopen every case tied to Kane's activities. Your mother's death will be reclassified as a homicide. We'll bring in a special medical examiner to review the original autopsy, and we'll compare it to the evidence your grandfather compiled." Barrett's expression softened slightly. "I can't bring your mother back, Miss Merrick, but I can make sure everyone knows she was murdered for trying to do the right thing. And I can make sure the man who killed her spends the rest of his life in prison." Eva felt something break loose in her chest. Relief. Grief. Vindication. "There's one more thing," Barrett said. "The money in your backpack. $75,000. Where did it come from?" Eva hesitated. "I don't know. It was in the lockbox." "We'll need to trace it. If it's proceeds from Kane's criminal enterprise, it may need to be seized as evidence." Dutch spoke up. "With respect, Agent Barrett Buck Merrick was a decorated Marine and a retired police chief. He had a pension and savings. That money could just as easily be his life savings left to his granddaughter." Barrett considered this. "We'll investigate. But I'm not going to seize it today. Miss Merrick, you'll need to keep detailed records of any money you spend in case questions arise later." "I understand," Eva said. Barrett stood. "You're both free to go. We'll need formal depositions later this week, but for now you've done enough. Go get some rest. And Miss Merrick." She looked up. "Your grandfather would be proud." The arrest of Chief Marcus Kane happened at 2:17 p.m. that afternoon. Eva wasn't there to see it, but Dutch heard about it through his contacts in the veteran community. Federal agents, backed by Oregon State Police SWAT, surrounded the Ridgewood police station and served the warrant. Kane was pulled out of his office in handcuffs, his face purple with rage, shouting about federal overreach and illegal searches. It didn't matter. The evidence was airtight. Walter Price was arrested trying to board a flight to Grand Cayman at Portland International Airport. Deputy Morrison, still hospitalized from the crash, was served his warrant in his hospital bed. By the end of the week, 17 people had been arrested. The mayor, the county clerk, 4 other officers from the Ridgewood PD, the owner of the Ridgewood Tavern, 3 county commissioners. The news media descended on Ridgewood like locusts. The story had everything: corruption, murder, a young woman's quest for justice. It dominated local news for weeks and made national headlines. Eva watched it unfold from a hotel room in Seattle that the FBI had arranged for her protection. Dutch stayed in the adjoining room, his rifle within reach. Old instincts dying hard. 3 months later, in early February 2026, Eva stood in a federal courtroom in Portland as Marcus Kane's trial began. She'd been called as a witness. The prosecution needed her to establish the chain of custody for the evidence to testify about her grandfather's state of mind to put a human face on the devastation Kane had caused. Eva wore clothes Dutch had bought her. Dark slacks, a simple blouse, shoes that weren't work boots. She'd gained back the weight she'd lost on the streets. Her ankle had healed. The cuts on her hands had scarred over. But the biggest change was in her eyes. She'd walked into that courtroom as someone who had spent her entire life being told she didn't matter, that she was just a foster kid, just a statistic. She walked out knowing she'd brought down a criminal empire. The trial lasted 6 weeks. Eva attended every day she wasn't required to be elsewhere. She watched Kane's defense team try to discredit her grandfather, try to paint Buck Merrick as a paranoid conspiracy theorist. It didn't work. The evidence was overwhelming. The 6 witness tapes, the financial records, the falsified documents with Kane's signature, and the final piece, the one that sealed Kane's fate, a recording Buck had made, secretly placed in a compartment in the radio that Eva had never found. It was a phone call between Kane and Walter Price, recorded 2 weeks before Buck's death. On the tape, Kane and Price discussed their plan to wait for Buck to die, then use his heir to gain access to the cabin. "We need the girl alive long enough to open the door," Kane's voice said, tinny through the old recording equipment. "Once we secure the files, she's a loose end. Make it look like an accident. Overdose, maybe. Like mother, like daughter." The courtroom had gone absolutely silent when that recording played. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Marcus Kane was sentenced to life in prison, without the possibility of parole for the murder of Abigail Merrick. He received an additional 30 years for the murder of Margaret Hendricks, 20 years for embezzlement, and consecutive sentences for racketeering, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. Walter Price received 22 years. Deputy Morrison, who cooperated with investigators and provided testimony against Kane, received a reduced sentence of 8 years. Dr. Helen Garrett, the medical examiner who had falsified Abigail's autopsy, was granted immunity in exchange for her testimony. She spent 3 hours on the stand describing how Kane had threatened her grandson, how she'd lived with the guilt for 10 years, how she'd kept the original autopsy report hidden in her home safe, waiting for the day someone would ask the right questions. When she stepped down from the witness stand, she walked directly to Eva and whispered, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Eva didn't forgive her. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But she understood. In late May 2026, exactly 1 year after Buck Merrick's death, Eva stood in Willamette National Cemetery on a clear spring morning. The graves were identical. White marble headstones in perfect rows, the final resting place of men and women who had served their country. The grass was green and precisely maintained. American flags dotted the landscape. Eva had used part of the $75,000, which had been ruled legitimate inheritance after a lengthy investigation, to have her grandfather's remains moved here from a county cemetery. She'd also paid to have her mother's body exhumed from a pauper's grave and reburied beside him. The headstones were side by side. Captain Richard Buckley, Merrick, USMC, 1950 to 2025. Semper Fidelis Abigail Grace, Merrick, 1987 to 2015. Beloved Mother. Truth Teller. Dutch stood beside Eva wearing his marine dress uniform for the first time in decades. Reverend Whitmore was there too, along with Agent Barrett, and a handful of others who had helped bring Kane to justice. Eva placed 2 white roses on the graves, one for each of them. Then she pulled out the pocket watch her grandfather had left her, the one engraved "Time Reveals All." She opened it, looking at the photograph inside 3 generations of Merricks connected by blood and sacrifice. "I did it," she said quietly. "I finished what you started." A bugler positioned at a respectful distance began to play taps. The mournful notes drifted across the cemetery a soldier's farewell. When the last note faded, Dutch placed a hand on her shoulder. What now? Eva had been thinking about that question for months. She'd been offered victim compensation, a substantial amount that would set her up for years. She'd been contacted by journalists wanting to write books, by filmmakers wanting to option her story. But there was only one thing she wanted to do. "I'm opening a shelter," she said, "for homeless youth. Teenagers who age out of the foster system with nowhere to go." She looked at Dutch. "I'm calling it Merrick House. I want it to be a place where kids like me can go when the world gives up on them. Where they can be safe while they figure out what comes next." Dutch smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. "Your mother would be proud. Your grandfather, too." "I know." Eva closed the pocket watch and tucked it back into her jacket. "I'm gonna need help running it. Someone who knows how to teach survival skills. Self-reliance. You offering me a job, kid?" "I'm offering you a purpose," Eva said. "You told me you owed my grandfather your life. Help me build something that honors his memory." Dutch extended his hand. "Deal." They shook on it. Reverend Whitmore stepped forward. "I'd like to offer my services as well. Spiritual counseling for the residents, and I have contacts in the social services community who can help with funding and licensing." "Thank you," Eva said. Agent Barrett approached last. "Miss Merrick, I wanted you to know that the state of Oregon has officially apologized for the mishandling of your mother's case. They're also reviewing every death investigation conducted in Ridgewood during Kane's tenure. We've identified 3 other potential homicides that were ruled accidental. Will those families get justice too? We're going to try." Barrett handed her a business card. "If you ever need anything, call me directly. What you did took courage most people don't have." Eva took the card. "I didn't have a choice." "Everyone has a choice," Barrett said. "You chose to fight. That matters." As the small gathering dispersed, Eva remained at the graves alone for a few more minutes. She thought about the girl she'd been 7 months ago, sleeping in laundromats and eating from dumpsters, convinced she was invisible and worthless. That girl was gone. In her place was someone who understood that family wasn't just about blood. It was about the people who stood beside you when the world tried to break you. It was about honoring the sacrifices of those who came before by making sure their deaths meant something. "Rest now," Eva whispered to the graves. "I'll take it from here." She turned and walked back to where Dutch was waiting by his truck. The old Ford had been repaired, the damage from the pursuit buffed out and repainted. Dutch had refused to get rid of it, said it had earned its scars. They drove back toward Portland together, the spring sun warm through the windshield. "You know," Dutch said after a while, "your grandfather used to say that the measure of a person isn't what they inherit. It's what they build with what they're given." Eva looked out the window at the mountains in the distance. He was right. "You're going to do good things, Ava Merrick." "We're going to do good things," she corrected. Dutch smiled. "Yes, ma'am." 3 months later, in August 2026, Merrick House opened its doors in Portland. It was a renovated church building in a neighborhood that had seen better days with room for 20 residents. Eva had used her inheritance money as seed capital, but donations had poured in once the story became public. The first resident was a 17-year-old boy who'd been living under a bridge. The second was a girl 16 who'd run away from an abusive foster home. By the end of the first month, they were at capacity. Dutch taught classes on practical skills, how to change a tire, how to cook on a budget, how to navigate the world when no one was looking out for you. Reverend Whitmore held evening discussion groups, creating a space for kids to process trauma without judgment. And Eva, who had spent her entire life being invisible, became the face of the organization. She spoke at fundraisers. She testified before the state legislature about foster care reform. She told her story over and over, not because she enjoyed reliving it, but because it helped other people feel less alone. One evening in late November 2026, exactly 1 year after she'd received her inheritance, Eva stood in the common room of Merrick House during a community open house. Donors mingled with residents. Local news cameras filmed segments about the organization's success. Someone from the crowd approached her, a woman in her 60s, professionally dressed with kind eyes. "Miss Merrick, I'm Elizabeth Garrett." Eva recognized the last name immediately. "Dr. Garrett's daughter, granddaughter," the woman corrected. "My grandmother wanted me to give you this." She handed Eva an envelope. Inside was a check for $50,000 made out to Merrick House, and a handwritten note: "I cannot undo the past, but perhaps I can help build a better future. This donation is made in memory of Abigail Merrick, who deserved better from all of us. Helen Garrett." Eva folded the note carefully. "Please tell your grandmother thank you." "I will." Elizabeth hesitated. "What you're doing here, it matters. My grandmother carries a lot of guilt. This won't erase it, but it's her way of trying to make amends." "It's a good start," Eva said. As Elizabeth left, Dutch appeared at Eva's side. "Big crowd tonight." "Yeah." Eva looked around the room at the kids laughing and talking, at the volunteers serving food, at the whole beautiful mess of people trying to help each other survive. "You did this," Dutch said. "You took the worst thing that ever happened to you and turned it into something that saves lives." Eva thought about her mother fighting against corruption, even though it cost her everything. She thought about her grandfather spending his last years gathering evidence so the truth wouldn't die with him. "They did this," she said. "I'm just finishing what they started." "No," Dutch said firmly. "They gave you the tools. You built the house." Eva smiled, the expression coming easier now than it had a year ago. "Then I guess I inherited more than just money." "Damn right you did." That night, after the crowd had gone and the residents had settled into their rooms, Eva sat in her small office and pulled out the pocket watch. She opened it, looking at the photograph of 3 generations. Time reveals all. Her grandfather had been right. Time had revealed the truth about her mother's death. Time had revealed the corruption rotting Ridgewood from the inside. Time had revealed that Eva Merrick was stronger than anyone, including herself, had ever believed. But time had also revealed something else, that the inheritance that mattered wasn't the cabin, or the money, or even the evidence. It was the choice to fight for what was right, even when the cost was unbearable. It was the refusal to let the powerful destroy the powerless without consequence. It was the understanding that justice delayed wasn't justice denied if someone was brave enough to keep demanding it. Eva closed the watch and set it on her desk, where it would sit every day as a reminder of where she came from and why the work mattered. Then she turned off the lights and went upstairs to the small apartment she kept above the shelter. Tomorrow there would be more kids who needed help, more fights with bureaucracy, more fundraising calls and budget meetings, and the endless grinding work of trying to save people who had been told they weren't worth saving. But tonight, Eva Merrick slept peacefully, because she knew with absolute certainty that her mother was proud of her. And in the end, that was the only inheritance that truly mattered.